Welcome back to Reasonable Faith with Dr. William Lane Craig. We're going to pick it up where we left off last time. We were listening to an interview with Neil Degrasse Tyson on God and science. And if you didn't hear that podcast, listen to that one and then come back and catch this one. This was part 2. We're going to continue with this interview from the Opie and Anthony show.
You didn't go into this. It seems like on your Wikipedia page, the public first just called you an atheist and you had to respond to it. And I know you've spoken about this before, but why is the distinction important to you, especially as a public figure?
I'm not so much concerned with the definition, the formal definition of the word atheist and the formal definition of the word agnostic. What concerns me is the behavior of people who call themselves those words, because that becomes the definition of the word. Of course, the dictionary really doesn't define words. It describes the words as they are used in society. And hence you have the evolution of words in the English language. So when I see people who say they are atheists and the energy that they invest in that fact, that's just simply not me. There's got to be some other word for someone who really just simply doesn't care on that level. And so agnostics seem to be something a little more accurate given my actual behavior in the presence of these philosophies. I don't like labels because it's an excuse for not actually thinking about the thoughts that the other person has.
Right.
And it ignores what might be nuances or information that lingers at the boundary of the parameters that the other person defines for that category. So the only ist that I am is a scientist, and the only ism that I don't even think I'm an ism. But the people who see a few things that I'll say or do and say, oh, he's a this or he's a that, and then label it. And I'm thinking, like, what are you doing? You know? and not only that, if you look carefully at the arguments I've given, most of them now are just scattered all over YouTube. But if you actually listen carefully, I'm at no point expressing an opinion. It may feel that way because I think I have a lot of sort of energy when I'm in front of an audience. Mm-hmm. But it's not about my opinion. It's about sort of what is going on in life.
He says here that agnostic best describes him, and that words can be in flux. Definitions we find in the dictionary may or may not reflect the usage that is going on among people now.
Well, it's certainly true that language evolves. We all know that. But nevertheless, words do have meaning according to those that natural or native language users use. And I think it would be accurate to say his view is agnosticism, not atheism. He is not claiming that God does not exist. He's just saying, I'm not convinced. And as for labels, labels are very useful in helping us to understand each other. Labels are vital when you go to the grocery store and want to know what's in the can. If it says pickles rather than ketchup, that's really important for you to know what you're getting. And so labels are important when a person says to you, I am a Muslim, or I am a Christian, or I am a Hindu. That helps us to understand where he's coming from. So descriptive labels are very useful. And we don't need to label one another. We can label ourselves and tell others descriptively via labels what we believe. So there's nothing the matter with using labels insofar as they are correct descriptions of what's there.
And he says, I really don't care much about this. I'm a scientist, and I'm not out to give my opinion. And so do you get from that, Dr. Craig, that he's saying, I'm going to deal in the factual world, and you guys can be over here in the opinion world all you want. That's where religion belongs.
I don't know. I wondered about that when he said, I mean, he says I'm a scientist, that's a label, right? I'm not a golfer. I'm not a dancer. I'm not a philosopher. I'm a scientist.
You guys can have all your labels.
Label.
I'm a scientist. Y'all can be labeled all day.
So, I mean, he uses a label to describe who he is, which is fine. But then he says, I don't have any opinions, when he just told us a few moments ago that God cannot be all-powerful, all good, and all-knowing, and yet there be the suffering in the world. that was certainly an opinion. Everything he says that's an assertion is presumably an opinion that he holds to.
Well, surely he must get that.
Otherwise, we would expect some sort of scientific proof for example, the claim that God and evil are incompatible with each other, whereas he didn't give any sort of argument for that, much less a scientific argument. So if he claims he has no opinions but is merely stating scientific facts, then my goodness, he's got a lot of evidence to provide for all of the assertions that he's made.
Let's continue and see what he says.
I think the most viewed among YouTubes that I've put out there that people associate with atheism or religion or spirituality was my presentation at the Beyond Belief conference in 2006. This was in San Diego. And we talked about intelligent design. It was freshly in the news because of the Dover, Pennsylvania case. I simply said that intelligent design, if you think of it as someone reaching the limits of their knowledge and then invoking the hand of something more intelligent than they, historically that simply would have been God, there's plenty of precedent for that among the world's most famous scientists throughout history. So it's not a new thought to think that God has something to do with the universe beyond the understanding that humans have been able to muster. So part of the talk was to present that fact and not sweep it under the rug, and then just say that intelligent design, since it embraces the ignorance beyond beyond your limits of understanding, it cannot possibly, when expressed that way, it cannot possibly serve a philosophy of discovery, which is what science is about.
He's talked about two things there concerning intelligent design. One is that scientists in history have always invoked God when they kind of get to the limits of their understanding. But then he comes back and says, but that's also a conversation stopper, a science stopper, in a sense. Once you invoke God, then you have stifled discovery.
Yes, that's the assertion. Unfortunately, not having heard his original talk, we don't know what justification he would give for these assertions. I think he has caricatured intelligent design. I know the works of people who are in that movement, and people like William Dembski, in his book The Design Inference, published by Cambridge University Press, offers a principled justification to inferring design. Dembski points out that we make design inferences all the time in life. As Degrasse Tyson said, what's going on in life? In determining on a crime scene that a fire is the result of arson rather than an accident. In detecting cases of plagiarism, as opposed to just an accidental coincidence. In cryptography, where we decode something that looks like gibberish to find an intelligent message in it. In insurance fraud, where the insurance investigator determines that something was actually deliberate rather than just by chance. We make design inferences all the time. And what Dembski tries to do in this book is to lay out a very principled way in which one can justifiably make a design inference. And then the claim of these folks who apply it to biology is that in biology, this principled inference pattern will yield the inference to some sort of intelligence behind the biological complexity in the world. So it is not just a sort of God of the gaps, invoking something because we've reached the bounds of our knowledge. Rather, it's a principled inference following a familiar pattern of reasoning that we use all the time in life. Now, maybe the ID theorists are wrong about this, but if so, that needs to be shown. You can't just caricature them by failing to come to grips with their model of design inferences.
He says something, Bill, as well, that is worth commenting on. He complains that in the world of YouTube and social media, that you can be portrayed a certain way based on what is most often placed out there on YouTube. And he says, there's a big percentage of YouTube videos about me that just deal in what I said about intelligent design. And he says, the atheist community wants to own me. And in fact, they keep going to his Wikipedia and changing that he's an atheist.
Really?
When he claims to be an agnostic, and he's saying, quit it. And so, anyway, that's one of the phenomena we find in social media today, that what's out there on YouTube is not necessarily representative of the full body of your work, but may just...
Yes, I've experienced that myself. I'm constantly amazed at how folks have only seen these popular level debates that I've engaged in, and they've never bothered to read any of my published work, much less the scholarly published work that is in peer-reviewed journals or with academic presses. So I can understand his complaint.
Let's wrap up the audio then from Dr. Tyson.
Science is about taking the unknown and figuring it out. Intelligent design, as presented in the Dover trial, and as is widely discussed, takes what is unknown and then doesn't try to figure it out. It says we can't figure it out and ascribes it to a higher intelligence. Right. End of story.
That's a caricature of his own invention. I would challenge him to cite supporting passages for us from the books of intelligent design theorists, like Michael Behe, William Dembski, Stephen Meyer, Michael Denton. You can't get away with making these kinds of caricatures unless you're prepared to give citations from the works of these people that support the portrayal that you're offering of them. I think that this is a straw man that doesn't accurately represent the work of these theorists, whether you agree with them or not. Part of scholarly responsibility is to represent accurately the views of your opponents.
Well, it certainly wasn't very generous, and he even tried to qualify it by saying, as it was presented at the trial and as people commonly use it. Well, if you're familiar with the works of Behe and Dembski and Richards and so on, and Johnson, then you're going to know a lot more than what was covered in the press at the trial.
Sure.
And so that would be a caricature and not representing the view very well.
So all I said was, it's not science. Therefore, it does not belong in the science classroom. You want to put it somewhere, it's fine. Put it in philosophy class or history class or religion class. It's not science. That entire argument, which summarizes the 30-minute talk, does not contain an opinion. There's not an opinion there. Science is about discovery. Intelligent design doesn't lead to discovery. It is not science. It's not an opinion, period. So people said, oh, he's an atheist. Let's make him an atheist. And they put it in my wiki page. I was fascinated by that. And I said, well, no, I'm not really that. I'm more agnostic. They changed it back to atheist. And so what intrigues me is the urge to claim me in the movement when I don't even write about this stuff.
Right.
And in fact, the extent to which I have addressed it occupies maybe 1.5% of my total speeches and writings, maybe 1.5%, and it's 8.5% the universe. But what happens is these bits get clipped, put on YouTube, and that's what people gravitate to. So if you do the YouTube statistics of my output, it looks like I'm 40% arguing about intelligent design.
Right.
When I just don't care. I just keep it out of the science classroom. What you do with it after that, I don't have the time, the interest, the energy to fight it. You're not going to see me debating religious people. You're not going to see me marching. You're not going to see me picketing. I'd rather just get people thinking accurately and honestly from the get-go. And what they do with their mind after that is their business.
Poor Neil. He's got a PR problem.
Well, once again, you have this expression that I don't have any opinions, where he's just offered his opinion that intelligent design is not science because it doesn't aid discovery. Now, how is that not an opinion? Even if it's true, it's still his opinion, and it's one that's, I think, disputable. The caricature of ID that he's offered might not be science, but ID theorists have tried to show how intelligent design can yield testable predictions that would be very different from the standard neo-Darwinian model of biological evolution. So he's just not interacting responsibly with the material on the other side. Besides that, Kevin, notice that he is happy to have intelligent design debated in the philosophy class, the history class, or the religion class. Now, I'd be very happy with that. As a philosopher, that's where I would want to see them discussed as well. Intelligent design theorists do claim that what they're doing is part of science. But I see that as really just a kind of corollary of intelligent design. The inference to an intelligent designer, I would be very happy with characterizing as a philosophical inference, and that therefore this belongs in the philosophy class. I don't think of myself as offering a different scientific theory when I say that God is the best explanation, say, for the fine-tuning of the universe. It's the same theory, but I would just use that as support for a premise in a philosophical argument leading to a conclusion that has theological significance.